Is it time for some metrobiology again? You bet your irradiated hide it is. Today we've got quite an interesting mutated species because as I have haphazardly made my way through the Metro games, about over the last year, I've begun to form different ideas about how primates are specifically affected by the mutagenic bombs and nukes dropped on Russia. The creature known as the Blind One officially confirms what I first thought. What am I talking about? Well, let's jump into the lore and morphology of the Blind Ones from Metro Exodus. So, spoiler alert in 3, 2, 1. As Anna's lungs begin to fall apart due to a mystery gas she breathed in, it is learned that her only hope of survival is for Artyom and his crew to journey to Novosibirsk. This bombed out city was hit much harder than the others, but for good reasons. Depending on what you consider to be a good reason. What was happening here were experiments into bioweapons as well as the altering of genes of primates. It's entirely possible that due to what they were working on and for how long, that information was leaked out to other countries, so this city was a major target. With radiation levels higher than that of Moscow, even with filters and added plating, a human cannot stay out on the surface for very long. The tunnels also offered very little protection to any survivors, and they had to heavily rely on green stuff to counteract the radiation in their bodies. This miracle substance kept a few people alive for a little while, I would say, in the shallow tunnels, but ultimately war would break out and only one survivor presumably remained. As you leave the shallow tunnels, however, something interesting begins to happen. You start having flashbacks awfully similar to those shown to you by a Dark One in Metro Last Light. These visions show you what happened, but it is unknown if these are brought on by just the sheer amount of radiation your body seems to be absorbing, or if you are actively being shown the past. You make your way through the tunnels to the surface where you actually spot a lone Dark One for a moment standing on a rooftop. But why way out here? What is a Dark One doing in Novosibirsk? As far as I know, only Moscow had the Dark Ones, so clearly though, this is not the case. But why is this exactly? Well, as you continue forward, you learn pretty quickly that you just spotted an evolved form of human. Climb up the ladder and the building containing the medicine for Anna, where you spot a behemoth of a monster. This is a Blind One. The Blind One rushes Artyom, picking him up, presumably planning on killing him and eating him. Getting a good look at this thing's face, we see the lethality and potential it has to completely decimate you. But you're probably asking yourself, what is this thing doing out here too? Russia was up to some sketch stuff prior to the apocalypse, it seems. Russia didn't just happen to create the Dark Ones, this was a methodical and well thought out process. Presumably beginning with the lower forms of primates, Novosibirsk appears to have just been testing grounds for genetic tampering. Putting the pieces together, here's what I believe may have happened. As we all know, we share 99% of our genetic coding with other primates. This makes them perfect testing candidates without the expenditure of human life should something go wrong. While typically not very ethical, sometimes it is necessary. Anyways, it is more than likely started with other animals. Russia utilized a compound to influence the genetic makeup of these creatures. As the trials were successful, they continued up the mammalian chain to apes. In this instance, it appears that gorillas may have been the creatures tested on. This yielded larger animals, but they also seem to have a much more primitive form of telepathy. That in itself is kind of an odd statement, but is actually a pretty expected result. Much like how humans now teach gorillas such as Coco to use sign language to communicate, their hand signals were not very refined, but it allows humans to get a general idea as to what this creature is thinking. But the point is that with a simpler mind comes simpler gestures. Dark Ones are evolved humans, therefore their telepathy was more refined and they can actually communicate ideas, feelings, and questions to less evolved humans, or basically us. This gorilla's ability to communicate comes off as extremely basic. Able to hear what it thinks in its mind, it really just comes down to it mentioning food or eating, as in it wants to eat you, but it just can't find you. It knows you're there, so it'll talk inside your head. This communication does not seem to be intentional though, and instead, it just really happens to be what it thinks about a certain action, and then this is communicated to you. Before moving into the morphology of this creature, I would like to take a, kind of trip down memory lane back to the librarians for a moment. It could just be my own ego talking, but this is actually a highly important creature as it does confirm my hypothesis, or at minimum supports it, that the librarians are actually mutated humans and not gorillas. And again, it all goes back to human creation versus nature creation. Let's start with human creation. Humanity values certain traits over others that nature might not because of our own advancement up the food chain. Intellect, communication, planning, etc. All these traits are valuable to us as a species because this is how we became apex creatures. We can see which ideas won out with the Dark Ones: the ability to survive radiation levels deemed lethal to humans, telepathy, and the ability to almost teleport. This would be highly valuable in a world where everything is radioactive and monsters monsters roamed about. But the Dark Ones are really more of an endpoint than an actual beginning, I suppose you could say. The Blind Ones were that beginning. Every trait that they have is similar to the Dark Ones in some respects. Telepathy being the main one, as they seem to rely on their body for mobile support, and they really cannot phase out of existence quite like a Dark One can, but they are able to communicate with other species inside their own head. And all of these are really the result of human experimentation. Nature's creation led to the librarians. A combination of radiation and a mutagenic bomb drop seems to have evolved these humans into creatures that for the most part are incapable of communication except in some instances with their previous forms, or the ability to broadcast their thoughts to other beings. Librarians are simply animals that came from humans. But I can hear what you're saying. Well then, what is the humanimal and how does that fit in? I believe it all goes back to the mutagenic bioweapon. So I think it's a multi-pronged attack, and it's actually kind of easily explained. So if you have Russian experimentation, that yields the Dark Ones, evolved humans capable of higher thought and telepathy, able to influence all the creatures around them and read them as well. Their bodies are highly adapted to radiation, and they are able to survive in environments that would outright kill a human. If you have no Russian experimentation but a high level of mutagenic bomb residue with high radiation levels, this yields the librarians. They are simply humans caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. We see this by their very stunted ability to talk to Artyom and how they almost had a human-like quality in their eyes when you had to stare them down. Their genome has been completely stirred up, leading to these monsters. If you have no Russian experimentation but a low baseline level of mutagen in the water, probably mixed with low radiation levels, this will yield the humanimal. Their genome hasn't been as highly disrupted by these effects, but there are clearly some changes to their physical form and cognitive abilities, which is why they are feral. This has led to a weak form of librarian, and interestingly, we can actually look at the legs and feet and see that had they had a little more alteration to them, they might be librarians themselves. And if you look at an early form of Russian experimentation, this yields the Blind Ones, gorilla-like creatures with an early, more primitive form of telepathy that all can hear. They are also viable in a highly radioactive environment. This is not to suggest that they have higher thoughts like the Dark Ones do, however. In summation, it appears that only 1 out of 4 scenarios would lead to a human-like creature with our cognitive abilities. Everything else just becomes absolutely brutal forms of animals, and they really only know how to eat. But let's move on to the biology of this fascinating creature and see what has happened to it since being experimentally altered. Basically, this guy is just kind of a bucket of ugly. Overall, the creature is tremendous in stature with a height well over 10 feet tall. In fact, it is so tall that to enter through doorways, it must crouch down. Due to its height and its sheer amount of muscle on them, it's safe to say that this creature would likely weigh somewhere in the range of about 1,000 pounds or around 453.5 kilograms. This is because they appear to be about double or at least 2.5 times the size of your standard silverback gorilla. With a baseline average gorilla weighing about 350 pounds or 160 kilograms and a max up to 430 pounds or 195 kilograms, this is a very heavy creature. They also seem to stand somewhere at a range of 5 feet 5 inches to about 5 feet 9 inches, which comes out to 1.63 or 1.76 meters tall. Again, the Blind Ones are about double this, so the realm of about 10 feet tall or roughly 3.1 meters and well over 1,000 pounds or 453 kilograms is not really that far outside of reality. The Blind One also appears to be covered in a thick, shaggy fur, at least if you have ultra settings turned on, or so I'm told. Hashtag Xbox One X for life, playa. Anyhow, getting to the feet, we clearly see that this creature is an ape, besides the dead giveaway of its appearance. It possesses 5 toes, which almost look like fingers, so this form of foot is fairly common in the primate kingdom, and they're used for grasping and manipulating objects in the environment. The only weird one out is actually humans, who have a more stunted looking foot because we use it basically only for walking. This type of foot that the Blind One has means that it is not that well adapted to upright walking and instead must also use its arms to aid in its locomotion. The Blind One's legs are a dead ringer for gorillas. We will have to talk about proportionate measures because this creature is larger and taller than your average human, but based on body size, the tibia and fibula are much shorter and thicker. The fibula is larger and has a much more supportive role than that of Homo sapiens. The femur is also thicker, but in your standard gorilla, it would be shorter. These larger bones have allowed for more muscle attached to these points, creating a creature with extremely powerful legs. This is necessary as it directly supports the weight of the Blind One overall. Somebody's been drinking their milk. I know we have to use our imagination in some context on these bones, as dissection is not possible without creating one of these things, but the pelvic region would also be quite massive. It's possible that it would be 3 to 4 times the size of our own pelvis. This area is responsible for holding in our organs and serves as the main attachment point for multiple different muscles, tendons, and ligaments. Anyhow, moving up to the abdomen and torso area, we see see that this creature is massive. Having a stomach much like an Olympic bodybuilder, they possess very little fat, and muscle is in great quantity just below the skin. The chest is gigantic. The rib cage, much like the pelvis, would be extremely wide and thick. Again, 3 to 4 times the size of a human's. This would hold massive lungs and a very powerful heart. This in turn has moved oxygen around the body in greater quantities, allowing for the growth of all the muscle that we do see. The shoulders and trapezius muscles almost seem to hold the neck in place because they're so large, and when you get that large, turning your head might be difficult, meaning that the blind one must also turn its body. Sure, the head can move, but again, due to being swolgulls, it would be difficult. The reason they're so large is because the shoulders almost serve as what would be like a hip joint area, because they do use their arms to walk. The arms of this creature are probably larger than an entire human body and just as powerful. The humerus bones are stocky, which is fairly normal in gorillas, but the forearms are much longer. This allows the creature to use the arms to assist in walking, and interestingly, the forearms almost seem to sport more muscle than the legs themselves. This also translates to tremendous gripping power. If there's anything to swing off of in the concrete jungle known as Novosibirsk, this creature's forearms would allow it to do so. These arms would also likely be fending off other powerful creatures, which, let's be honest, it could rip them limb from limb. The hands have stayed in their normal forms, well, semi-normal anyways. Much like the rest of the creature, it has increased in size. This is due to the fact that the fingers directly support the forward-leaning weight as the creature moves. The bones have increased in size to allow for this, but this has left them much less dextral like their gorilla ancestors. Lastly, we get a look at the head. The head of a blind one is about the size of a human torso and abdomen. This has done a couple things. First, it allows for a larger brain. Now, a larger brain doesn't always mean smarter, but in this case, it actually might mean that it is smarter. The creature clearly has the use of telepathy, but are you interested in the idea behind telepathy? Because Papa Roanoke is going to give it to you, so just strap in for this. I actually did some research on some online scholarly articles for this one. Telepathy is an interesting prospect in general, the ability to communicate without really communicating physically. Some humans actually do appear to have the ability to communicate at varying levels in guessing tasks. Have you ever just felt something but you didn't know why, or you knew something but you didn't know how? Biologically, we are aware, and this is a very real possibility in humans, and believe it or not, has its own specific area in the brain. During a study based on a card guessing game, the brain was imaged using an MRI scan. A very interesting phenomenon ended up popping up. Now, if you've ever seen Ghostbusters, you remember when Dr. Venkman was holding up the card and he was testing the student's ability to use telepathy. This is an actual study done. The doctor would hold up a card and then someone would focus and end up guessing the card correctly based on what the doctor was thinking. The brain showed significant activation in the right parahippocampal gyrus. This activation was completely different from those who could not pick it up with their minds, and in those that couldn't do this, the left inferior frontal gyrus is activated, and they seem to get it wrong. This is just one test done, but it's fascinating because some humans appear to actually have a very primitive form of telepathy embedded in their brains. So it appears that the limbic system is responsible for what appears to be telepathy. In the blind one, the limbic system would need to be potentially increased in size or altered in some way to allow for further activation and strength. If this was done, the brain of the gorilla would have the ability to send out these communications to allow Artyom to read his mind. It is possible that this area has already been increased in humans naturally, meaning that the tampering with these biological structures by Russian scientists amplified what was already there, and this is how the dark ones were able to communicate with humans, whereas the blind ones are just barely able to, due to their previous form not having a more defined area for telepathy. The face of the blind one is not too altered from its previous form. The mouth possesses very large teeth, but there are still function-specific teeth. The front teeth are still used for cutting, whereas the canines have increased in size, so these could pierce deep into other animals as they are several inches in length, and this coupled with the arms allows them to tear out large chunks of other animals in the area. The nose actually looks about normal for what a gorilla is, believe it or not, but where the eyes sit, they have been completely covered. We all know that radiation causes macular degeneration of creatures, but this almost looks intentional. It is possible that to test these creatures' ability to telepathically locate certain things, they cover the eyes with skin grafts or remove them entirely. Again, experimenting on apes in current times is not entirely ethical, at least from my standpoint as a scientist, but I also do see why it's necessary, and in this instance, I would probably disagree with the methods, so let's not do that in real life. Still though, whether done by human hand or simply a mutation, this has blinded the creature, causing it to rely on its sense of smell, hearing, and possibly even the telepathic sense, as it seems to know you're nearby without seeing you and you're not moving. If a blind one somehow gets a hold of you, then you are DED, my friend. It will use the those massive, I guess, fists and powerful arms to basically pulverize your entire skeleton, contusions to the organs, internal bleeding, you know, all the good stuff that immediately takes you out of the game. But in real life, it would be much more gruesome. This creature would more than likely have very little issue ripping larger, more dangerous animals apart. You as a small human with very little muscle and connecting bones and even, you know, snappable thin bones, you would just be completely torn to shreds. You ever play Gears of War? Remember when the Berserker tears apart the Cog Soldier? Yeah, that would basically be you in a heartbeat if this thing ever got a hold of you, which BTW would actually be a cool topic. Berserker versus Blind One, because they're both technically blind and they're both about 10 feet tall. This creature's main weakness is distance and stealth. Again, it's blind, and while the Dark One is able to visualize if a creature is near, maybe the Blind One is only able to feel that the creature is near. Due to this, sneaking around it should be done, as shooting it does virtually nothing. It is possible to bring it down, give it enough firepower, but there's an old proverb for this. Only when a mosquito lands on your testicle do you learn violence is not always the answer. Oh man, it felt good to cover some Metro lore. I've heard you guys would like me to cover the Sarfish as well, so that will absolutely be done in the future. But thank you guys for watching. I hope everyone enjoyed my video covering the blind ones from Metro Exodus. If you did, leaving a like really does help the video, my dude, and if you are new and enjoyed it, why not subscribe? Everyone make sure to hit that stupid notification bell, because I don't believe anybody's getting notified at this point, and I think it's also a great way to keep up with the channel. Also, if you made it this far, let me know what you think about my structuring of the Dark Ones, Humanimals, Librarians, and Blind Ones. Got a different idea? You know, let me know, dude. So I heard a lot of y'all on the Chameleon episode I put out saying that you aren't terribly fond of the shorter videos, so I'll keep that in mind going forward. But here's a card if you didn't know I even posted that and would like to go watch it. Just throw an absolute shade at YouTube. Anyhow, I will drop my Twitter, Discord, and Patreon links if you're interested in joining any of those. And speaking of patrons, I would like to thank mine. At the astronaut tier, we have Joseph Gibbons. Thank you for the support, bro. At the astrophysicist level, we have the absolute unit known as Mom Spaghetti. Next up, our scientists are Arulam Lupe. Then we got your boy Artyom Chornage. Oh, look at that! It's Zach Krieger. And lastly, it's not a spoon. Our resident is A. Laurentis. Our geneticists are going to be Andrew Lawson, Divine Whisper, Laffy No Skill, and with their masters in biology, we have Adam Hartswick, Cameron Smith, Off Syrup, Edgy McGee, Mr. Poyfish, Stutz, The Rin of Lies, and the Otterman. And lastly, with their bachelors in morphological sciences, we have add to the list Ahigao Comics, Anthony Wolf, Dustin Ellis, Eric Scott Gillies, Fruit Eater, Kyle McHenry, Molten Tarts, Professor Bennett's, Riot, Russell McBride, The Original Fat, and LOL the fact I got age restricted on a video for reading this name, Trixie Lulamoon, Ulf Hednar 845719. I think that's about it. Thank you guys for all the support. So I hope everyone enjoyed it. Thanks for watching, and I will see y'all in the next one.